this is a pretty controversial product, but I'm going to kind of sidestep all that controversy, and you're going to see that it's actually not as bad as they made it out to be in a minute. But real quick, I've spoken to a number of people in the community that develop products in the industry that are very popular, and the general consensus is that while there is a large population of people that vote with their dollars and don't support companies that they don't want to support because they believe that the companies don't do good things in the space, there is a much larger general population that, number one, probably doesn't even know of any of the controversy, and number two, doesn't care. So this is the Tyrannus X9 Lite, and it would be absurd for me not to cover this controller because I think it's one of the most high-profile controllers that are going to be coming out in the industry moving forward, and there are going to be a couple others that are on the way. So what this controller was supposed to be is an attempt at FrSky to lock down their protocol. They weren't big fans of people kind of using their transmission protocol in ready-to-fly products like Whoops and other toys. Also, people just ripping off their protocol and making their own receivers completely to work with their own systems, as well as companies like TBS piggybacking off of their market share to dominate a lot of their market share. And as you can see here, clearly FrSky hasn't done such a great job at what their objective was supposed to be, because I have Crossfire on mine and it works beautifully. And I'll show you how that happened as well. So let's turn it on, and as you can see, it's running OpenTX. And I don't know if FrSky realizes this, but OpenTX is, at least as far as I know, at this point still open source. While they might have a kind of a chokehold on OpenTX, anybody can still download the firmware and alter it however they like and make their own branch and do whatever they want. Now, this is not that. This is a nightly build, I believe, from the OpenTX team themselves. And the firmware that came on my controller was in fact locked down, and it did not allow me to bind to any of my receivers. But you can update the old FrSky receivers, and they've actually done a pretty good job on the updating. However, I haven't done it myself, but other people have told me all you need to do is plug it into the servo plug at the bottom here, and it will update the receiver and give you the access protocol. Now let's skip through this, the nightly build and all this jazz, and I'll show you that when I go to my RF module, I have CRSF on here. I also have the multi-modules. I also have a FlySky multi-module. I also have R9. I have R9 Lite. I have R9 Access and some other access, and I have S-Bus. So I just installed a new version of the firmware this morning, and I also realized that I don't have access to the D16 mode on the internal module. Now, somebody from the community, which I'm not going to name because I don't think I want him to have a whole bunch of messages, helped me set this up. It's not really challenging to set up, but he was very instrumental in helping me and saved me a whole load of time. And I'm going to put some things in the description below. However, this is not a tutorial on how to do this. It is, however, very easy to do. I don't think there's a single person out there that wouldn't be able to do this as long as you're comfortable with using a USB wire. It's the easiest thing to do in the entire industry. So don't be afraid of updating your firmware on the controller. Now, I also know that this controller is supposed to have a version that's from FrSky that's a custom firmware that's not OpenTX, but I don't know if that's going to come or not. But in general, it's very easy to update to a nightly build, and it gives you access to everything, access to CRSF, and it's also extremely easy to add in a Crossfire module. Now, I've unplugged mine. I'm going to take it off and show you what the Crossfire module typically comes as is just this piece, at least the big boy Crossfire, and you typically just tape it onto this little JR bay, which is empty, and you shove it in the JR bay on your controller, and that's how Crossfire typically works, at least the large module. I don't know if the small one will work. I'm pretty sure people have already figured out how to put the baby Crossfire into the controller as well. It is exceptionally easy to solder in these wires. Now, I have picked up a second set of wires for my Crossfire because I didn't want to cut my original wires on my JR module, and I'm showing you a picture. It's 3 wires. It's the easiest thing in the world. I did not wire the 6-volt into mine because I prefer only running my Crossfire on the external power bay, and it works beautifully. Now, in preparation for this controller, I did actually pick up an R9 module because I thought that FrSky was going to lock down everything and make it impossible for me to test this controller, and I was really bummed because I knew that this was going to be kind of a shrunken down version of the Tyrannus. However, when I picked up the R9 module and I got the receivers, I saw the antenna and I was like, this is terrible, this limp antenna that holds a bend. When you compare it against the Crossfire antenna, you see that the Crossfire antenna is much, much firmer and much nicer. It's considered the Immortal T. And whether you think that R9 is a copy of Crossfire or not, I personally believe that it's heavily, heavily inspired by Crossfire and the whole Crossfire system. They clearly, once again, went about 80% of the way with their copy and did an 80% job of the copy. They did not take it 100%, just like so many other companies do. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the controller. I'm not going to go through every single little detail because there's tons of other videos that are going to do that. I'm going to compare it against all the other controllers that I have sitting out here, which are the only ones that I could have found in my chest of everything I've ever had. So, real quick, this is a shrunken down version of the Tyrannus, which I'll compare to in a minute. The controller size, if you see my hand, I'll compare my hand to the Tyrannus because I think a lot of people have a Tyrannus. I have relatively large hands. I feel like the Tyrannus in my hands is too big for a pinch grip. Even for a thumb grip, it's a little large. It's hard for me to reach the corners of the sticks, even in this large controller. I have always wanted a somewhat smaller size of a similar-ish shape controller so that I can more comfortably grab holds of the sticks and do what I want to do. This is exactly that, and it is just a shrunk. It's like a 75% shrunken down size. Here, I'll compare it against this right now. It's a 75% shrunken down size, or 75-80% shrunken down size of the Tyrannus, and this is, in my hands, feels incredible. Now, again, I have large hands, but this is a relatively small controller. It's sort of somewhat like the jumper controllers, like the small, which I couldn't find in my chest, but the jumper controllers, which are not the T16, but the ones that came before it. And it is just exceptionally comfortable to hold. It's just so comfortable to hold. Now, the good things about the controller is that it is smaller. It's made of thick plastic. It's super cheapy plastic, but it's made of thick plastic. So it's the best I can say about that. The scroll wheel is great because it actually, each click of the scroll wheel actually moves it one position, so you're not kind of guessing with the scroll wheel where it kind of like skips over a couple of items along your way, which is something that happens on a lot of chargers. It also uses 18650 cells. It uses 18650 cells, which is fantastic. However, if your 18650 cells have like the flat top and bottom, you may want to consider putting a dab of solder in on one of the ends like I have so that they actually contact each other. That's something that I think Albert Kim had an issue with, and I told him, you can unscrew this module, the battery module, and just use a LiPo if you wanted. As you can see here, I have Velcroed a massive, the only 3S LiPo that I have left, to the back of my controller to use with my Crossfire. Maybe the two biggest downsides of this controller, aside from the exceptionally cheapy plastic build, it feels like an absolute toy in your hands, is that number one, you have to hold this stupid button to turn it on, which I don't know why they got rid of the switch on the Tyrannus, because it's just so annoying to hold that button to turn it on and turn it off, in my opinion. It's just my gripe personally. Also, this hook for your neck strap is made of plastic. I mean, I know it's a cheap controller, but come on, it's so close to being so good. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that these gimbals are in fact smaller than the original Tyrannus gimbals, and I really would have preferred the gimbals to be the full-size, full-throw gimbals, but they are not. They are about 90% of the throw of the Tyrannus. They're not 100%. They're more than pretty much any other controller that has a smaller travel than the Tyrannus or the QX7. So that is huge for me because it's a small controller with almost 100% travel on the sticks, more than jumper, which I'll get to in a second, and it's lighter and it fits in my bag easier and it does Crossfire. And the only thing I'm worried about with this controller is if the electronics inside are going to hold up, because it is so darn cheap. I don't know what else they've cheaped out on the internals. So when I picked up mine, it was, I think I got it for $60. It was like the first one, and it was like really super cheap. I don't even remember, either $60 or $70, and it's been going up in price $10 at a time. And like I said, FrSky's strategy with this was to capture new people in the market with a cheap controller and then make them pay more for the receivers and lock them into the FrSky ecosystem, and then start making flight controllers that have their receiver built in, and start making like Whoop products with all their receiver or their protocol built in. That clearly fell through. So what we have now is a $90 controller, which I believe is going to stay at $90. And I would argue that at $90, it's not an easy sell, but it's also not a hard sell. And I say that only because when you pick this thing up and you hold it, you know it's a toy. It feels like an absolute toy. The Tyrannus feels like a much better quality controller, and my Tyrannus is now 5 or 6 years old, and I have the stock gimbals on mine, and they are totally fine. They are not Hall sensor gimbals. They don't have bearings in them. They have nothing. These gimbals do have bearings. What I could find is on one side. I couldn't actually see the other side, so it might be a dual bearing gimbal, might not be a quad bearing. They also don't look like Hall sensor gimbals. I don't know if they are. I haven't even looked at the spec sheet, but I'm pretty sure that they're regular like potentiometer gimbals, but they work fine. I mean, I literally have had mine for 6 years, and it's been my main controller for 6 years, and I've had no issues. So I don't have a problem saying that I don't really need Hall sensor gimbals, and I don't need the quad ball bearing as long as the gimbals stay smooth. And I was able to fortunately get these gimbals to feel really, really nice. And the spring tension is also really, really high. So I don't know if FrSky kind of like stumbles on to doing all these things that feel great, but I have to say that this controller just feels so good in my hands, and it's such a nice size that fits in my bag. I don't like FrSky, but in this case, they have given us something that has gone beyond what they intended, and it's so easy to hack and modify and do whatever you want with that it's just a win for the entire community if the price came down a little bit or the quality got slightly better. Now, like I said, I don't know what it's going to be like in terms of quality control, but I'm going to use it and see where it ends up. I'm not going to use it with any of the FrSky receivers, obviously. I'm only going to be using it with Crossfire, which is the funny part. Okay, let's compare it to the T16. The T16 is a much larger controller. As you can see, it's a much larger controller, and that was pretty much my biggest issue with it. I don't need this massive screen. In fact, I don't even need the screen on the Tyrannus on the X9 Lite. They could have made the screen much smaller, much finer resolution. Sorry, much finer pixels, so it was a smaller screen like the X Lite, which has the same resolution screen, and it uses pretty much the same firmware, but it's just a bigger screen for whatever reason. So yeah, they could have made it even smaller, and I would have liked to see it even smaller so it fits in my bag even easier. So the T16 has a shorter throw gimbal, but the gimbals do feel better. Now I know that that's a kind of a big deal because it's hard to convey feel, and in fact, I personally never even was able to tell the difference between gimbals and how they feel like until I fly. When I flew with these gimbals, I could feel the throttle and I could feel the roll and the pitch, and I felt, oh, okay, I can feel the weight of the gimbal. I can feel that it is, I have to use that word, smoother than most other gimbals that I'm used to. Now, these are not Hall sensor gimbals, and I think they're still not even dual quad bearing gimbals, but whatever is in these gimbals does feel nicer than the X9 Lite, but the travel on these gimbals is shorter, and that's really the number one reason, aside from the size, that I have moved over to the X9, because I really, really want that long travel. And the controller is just so big. There's no need for the controller to be so big. Sure, it looks good. It feels really nice in quality, much better quality feeling than the X9. And it's also got all these pots and whatever so that you can fly all of your planes or whatever you want if you're into that. This one does not have a whole lot of switches on it, which I don't care about because I only use 2 switches anyways. And I think the vast majority of the market only uses 2 switches. As I said, compared to the QX7, it is just a shrunken down version of it. The X9 XD, this one compared to this one, the shrunken down version. The gimbals on this feel very similar to the X9 Lite. However, the gimbals are longer travel, and that's pretty much it. Otherwise, the controller itself, the plastic and the grip and the whole thing just feels like a much better quality controller. Clearly, the neck hook is metal; it's not plastic. Behind that, it is actually fastened to the controller really nicely. I have had no problems with my controller. I've dropped it twice in its 6-year history, and it's been fantastic. And everything has worked until recently. The enter button here just stopped working, and I haven't bothered trying to fix it. So now let's compare it to the QX7. The QX7 is this bastard of a controller which they made, which was supposed to be like a cheap entry controller, but I think they totally botched it because, I mean, this thing is so freaking chunky. I just don't know what they were thinking. But it did work. It was nice. I actually like these flat sides up here for pinching, but I have huge hands and I actually like this controller for pinching, but it kind of cramps your hands for pinching and thumbing. This was not a great controller. I wanted to use it, but it also did not work well with Crossfire. It would have these weird warnings. You'd have to mod it just to use the Crossfire. That's not a good day for me. But as you can see, the X9 is about the same height, but it's just narrower. It doesn't have the JR bay, so it has got the updated bay that FrSky is using, and it's just a smaller controller in general. So yeah, it's a win across the board, except for the gimbals. The gimbals on this are the full travel gimbals that FrSky is used to doing. So I wish they would have gone the full travel gimbals, but the backside of these gimbals are in fact smaller. The whole construction of the gimbal has been redesigned, and it is a lot smaller than all the gimbals in their full travel controllers. Now, compared to the X Lite, which is a more appropriate comparison because it is somewhat more size appropriate, people have been running Crossfire on their X Lite with the same sort of mod as I did on the X9 Lite, but it's kind of cumbersome to hang this massive thing on the back of your controller and then find a place to hang a battery for your Crossfire. Now, this might just be the way I do it. Other people might do it a much better way than me, but hey, I don't know how they're doing that. I also absolutely despise the tiny gimbals on this controller. They're just so small. It's really just made for thumbers. A lot of thumbers really love this controller for the size, and a lot of thumbers really love the smaller travel of the sticks. I personally cannot thumb. I only pinch, and I don't see a point to the travel being so short on these gimbals. I'm pretty sure most people can reach the full travel of the X9 Lite because the controller is physically smaller. It's smaller in the thickness, and it's smaller in the size. The whole grip of the controller is smaller, and that's why it feels so nice to me. This one it feels great as a video game controller, but just does not feel good as a quad controller. Now, the next thing is the Nirvana. The Nirvana is actually a very similar size to the X Lite, these freaking names, the X9 Lite, but similarly to the X Lite, swinging your Crossfire off the back of this thing is not as easy as you might want it to be, and there's also nowhere to put your battery. Also, this is great for some people that love thumbing, that are specific thumbers. Now, it has been designed specifically for pinchers, but this definitely does not fit my hands as a pinch grip, and it just doesn't work for me. The gimbals do not have enough tension in them, although I do have the old original springs in them, and the gimbal travel is very small. It's about the same as it's a little bit more than the X Lite. So I'm not a fan of this feel. However, this controller is the most solid feeling controller of the entire bunch. It feels like it's been carved from granite. It feels like the best possible quality in a controller. I mean, these trim switches just feel so nice. Almost all the things on this controller just almost feel like military spec, except for the very lightweight gimbals and the gimbal springs, which is just annoying. Otherwise, yeah, that's the comparison. I can't really think of anything else to say about all these controllers, but yeah, I am really thankful that FrSky screwed up making this controller so that I could use Crossfire on it, because it is a really phenomenal size for my hands. However, like I said, the value proposition of this controller being $90 is hard to swallow when you feel the quality of everything. It does work. However, I don't know what quality control is going to be like with the lower price. They had to cut corners somewhere, even though I know these things do not take a lot of money. They're not expensive things to produce at all. They are rudimentary products. They're very rudimentary technology. They're not expensive to produce. However, they still like their profit margins. So they had to cut corners somewhere. And I can tell you, they cut a lot of corners in the casing and the plastic and the feel of the controller, because it feels like a cheap toy. Big warning, it feels like a cheap toy, but I do like it for now. And because of the overall smaller size, smaller thickness of this controller, it feels amazing in my hands, and it will be the controller I use for the time being. Now, like I said, there are a couple of more controllers on the way. I don't know when they're going to come. I specifically know of at least 3 controllers coming out soon. Soon meaning sometime in the next 6 to 8 months. For now, I reluctantly say that this is my highest recommended controller for a beginner, for a newcomer, for anybody that's entering the industry, for anybody that wants a new controller, because I think it's going to fit thumbers fantastic. I think it's going to fit pinchers fantastic. I think it's going to fit big hands great, like it does for me. It's going to fit small hands as good as anything else aside from the X Lite. If you have small hands and you're a thumber, this is probably your controller no matter what. It's very hard for me to convey everything in one video, but that's my opinion and my take on everything about this controller. So yeah, thanks FrSky for screwing up, or maybe they didn't screw up. I don't know what they did. Whatever they did, I know that this is going to be an exceptionally popular controller, and you don't have to use only FrSky's receivers or whatever protocol or anything else. I'm pretty confident that people will figure out how to hack the bejesus out of this thing because it's just so easy to work on when you take the thing apart. So yeah, that's it. Hope this was a helpful video. Don't forget to floss your teeth, because flossing is very important. It's actually more important than brushing for most people. Take care. Bye.